Very good evening to all the participants. Thank you so much for joining us. We see participants are joining in huge numbers. So if any of you who can hear us and see us can quickly type a yes in the chat box, so we know that we are visible and I'm audible. Participants, can you quickly type a yes in the chat box if you can see us and hear me? Great, thank you so much. I see yes pouring in the chat box. Great. It's a really exciting topic that we have the webinar on today, and I have Dr. Andreas with me joining us from Zurich. Thank you so much, Dr. Andreas, for joining us. We'll just wait for a few minutes for the participants to go live, and then I'll take the opportunity to introduce you, and then we can start with the proceedings. Thank you, everyone. Again, the participants who just joined in, I just want to repeat that if you have logged in now, you will see a button to say which says click broadcast, start broadcast. Just click on that. You'll be able to see the video and audio. I'm sure some of you might be having a difficult time with that. Just click on that. And we have the Mindlet team in the chat box supporting you. So whatever questions you might have throughout the webinar, please type in the chat box. If you have any question that you want Dr. Andreas to address during the webinar or at the end of it, please mark it with a question option. There's a small circle when you type on the chat, and you can pose that as a question and we'll be able to identify them. But keep posing your questions throughout during our discussion as well. And the two of us and the Mindlet team will be able to address those. But please be really attentive because we have a lot of information to share. And we, of course, have Dr. Andreas who have such insight in this domain in particular. So I'll quickly set the context about today. We all know that when we look at education abroad, it's a very expensive thing. And that is why scholarships are an important factor that helps support a student's dream to study abroad. And that's an important factor. But along with that, there's much more that needs to be done and taken care of. So that is why we have Dr. Andreas here with us today, who will shed some light upon what the domain is all about. How do you apply to education abroad, the importance of standardized testing, and how to attain the scholarships even in these testing times. I see participants are still joining in. So in the meanwhile, I'll introduce Dr. Andreas, so you're familiar with who he is. Great. So Dr. Andreas is a full-time professional private tutor with a range of overseas postings under his belt, including France, Italy, Monaco, and Switzerland. He currently teaches and resides in Zurich, a former academic with degrees in English from Magdalen College, Oxford, International Relations from LSE, and a PhD from University of Bristol. He continues to be active as a senior research fellow for the Atlantic Council of the UK, the NATO Public and Youth Engagement Organization. An experienced university admissions counselor, Dr. Andreas has been a member of the Collegeify Europe team since its inception, assisting with the development of the platform through his insights as a professional educator. He has successfully sent many students across the Atlantic thanks to his integration of Collegeify's insights into his teaching methods, and continues to advocate for the evolution of education through intelligently applied technology. We welcome you, Dr. Andreas. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much indeed, Abhishek.
Of course. And thank you for the Collegeify team for joining us as well. We have a few members from their team as well with us. So without further ado, I would like to ask Dr. Andreas to introduce what Collegeify does and talk a bit about this amazing organization.
Yes, well, I suppose that's the most obvious first question. Collegeify really has been a supplement to my teaching and also a supplement to many students that I've taught, with or without my direct involvement in their use of the platform. The way that we envisage it now has grown a lot in the sort of 3 years that I've been involved with them since the inception of the online platform. Initially, the platform sought to apply advanced machine learning and artificial intelligence to students' interactions with the platform for the SAT and the ACT tests, which are the standardized tests that all students have to sit to go to university in the US, as I'm sure most of you are aware. But increasingly, these standardized tests are being adopted by a range of other universities across the world, from Asia to Europe and elsewhere. and indeed India. So the platform really tried to bring a lot of technology to bear that already exists in areas like fintech, and apply it to learning so that students themselves could be empowered to better understand where their strengths and weaknesses lay, but also so that teachers like myself could cut out the kind of heavy legwork of having to sift through a lot of handwritten work. And now these tests lend themselves particularly well to artificial intelligence and machine learning, because you can have, as the platform does, huge question banks, and the kinds of mistakes that students tend to make tend to be of a kind and can be identified and grouped for various reasons. It could be that you're making mistakes based on difficulty level, or you could be making mistakes based on the content of the question, or perhaps the way the question is phrased or asked, or even more unnoticeably, the time that you're spending on a question. And so uniquely, I think, in the field of these kind of online platforms for preparing for university admissions, the Collegify app packages this up nicely and reads you as a student. And not only, well, it does two things. It builds a constantly changing course for you that is tailor-made, because it's constantly updating with every engagement that you have with the platform. And that really is unique. And it also is able to, well, it's also able to give you some of the most insightful analytics based on the tests that you do and the worksheets you do, which is a far cry from the diagnostic tests I did back in my day when I applied to the States, where I was literally sat down for 3 hours, went through a test, with my crosses, and then that result was spat out by a machine, and I knew that I had a certain score, but I had no idea really about the granularity of my performance. And that's really what Collegify has allowed me to capitalize on as a teacher, because it means in the precious little time that I have with my students, I can hone right in on what's necessary. Equally, parents or students who are considering additional help or don't perhaps understand where the problem lies, they're able to actually also be given a very clear and evidence-based picture of what needs to be done for the next steps of progress to be achieved. So that really, in a nutshell, is what Collegify does today. And what I'm heavily involved with at the moment is to actually broaden this out to education more generally. I won't really say more than that, but it's safe to say, I think, through my long experience as a private tutor, that I think education in general is ripe for a shake-up. And we really believe that a really high standard of learning ought to be achievable by almost anyone in the world for a very low price, and that money should not stand in the way, or lack of it should not be a hindrance to anyone achieving their sort of their ultimate goals. And I come from a disadvantaged background. My parents are both first generation British immigrants from Eastern Europe and from Cyprus following the war, and they moved heaven and earth to put basically all of their money and savings into my education. But one thing I've realized along that journey is that a lot of that learning, a lot of the money paid for that learning, could actually be very, very well supported, if not replaced by some very clever programs like Collegify, that assist the students to have a sense of direction and be able to focus in on their weaknesses, which is ultimately what we as teachers are here to do. Yeah,
I think that gives a very good sense of understanding, Dr. Andreas. I definitely agree with the vision and the way you have put it across, and the brilliant work Collegify is doing. So, of course, one of the important questions that I'm sure all of our students are willing to hear from you is because you come from one of the universities that is most sought after in the world and everyone reckons with, that's Oxford. So can you just talk about your experience at the university and what actually sets the university apart from the rest of the universities in the world?
Well, I think what really sets Oxford and Cambridge apart is the collegiate system. So the university is divided up into these little, almost hermetically sealed colleges, that draw a nice cross section of tutors from across the different faculties. Now, some colleges will have predispositions towards science, others towards humanities, or indeed specific subjects. My college, Magdalen, was quite a strong all-round college, I would say. It's sort of relatively consistently scores in the sort of top two or three. But you tend to choose your well, a lot of people tend to choose colleges for the wrong reasons, which is that it looks pretty, or it's near this bar or something like that. But actually,
Right.
it makes more sense to try and pick, because you have the opportunity to do so, to actually pick a specific professor or a group of professors who match your potential future research interests. Don't forget, going back in history, Oxford and Cambridge were the only two universities in Britain, and not that long ago, some 250 years ago, and each of them had a parliamentary seat. And the reason that the collegiate system existed, and that people would choose these very small institutions and choose them very carefully based on which professors were theirs, because the intention was, if you were going to university, it was either to become a teacher or to become an academic. Now, the world has since changed, and all the red brick universities sprang up in the 19th century, and yet Oxford's retained this very odd, and Cambridge too, this odd collegiate system. But what that does mean for the most of us who are just going to go through as undergraduates and leave and go off and have corporate jobs or any other kind of job and not go through and be academics, is that you get a particularly intense opportunity, or an opportunity to have an intense learning experience where you really do have a one-to-one or a two-to-one regular meeting with a tutor. And the classic style was actually to read out your weekly essay to the tutor and then just have it critiqued in front of you. So it is this it's a very discursive environment. You feel very safe in a very small group of people. I had only 8 people taking my English course in my college. And you really don't need to leave the college for anything. Each college has its own library, it has its own accommodation, and it also has rooms and places to eat. So the idea is that you want for nothing, and you're entirely free to just think. And that is why I think consistently the level of research is world leading, even though these colleges don't necessarily have the most money in the world compared to the titans of the university system like Harvard, which I think is sitting on a $36 billion endowment. So the experience was I would say academically certainly the most fruitful, and obviously you have access to the 2 reference libraries in the UK. Two of the 3. One is the British Library in London, one is in Cambridge, and one is the Bodleian in Oxford. And you can just call up any book in English that was ever published, and it's there, between 2 and 4 hours later, which is fantastic.
Right, great. I think that answers my question pretty well, and that gave us a good insight about it. And can you also talk about, when we speak of Oxford and Cambridge, we all know these are 2 of the most competitive schools to crack into. So what do you think goes into applying to these universities? And of course, taking a leap, when I say this, that getting a scholarship at these 2 primary institutions.
Well, the scholarship system there functions a little differently. So the scholarships tend to be given after your first year exams, which are called your prelims. And it's from that point onwards that you're then awarded the scholar's gown, which is the longer gown that you would wear around when you go to your tutorials, or if you're at a more traditional college, or to your exams. It's also important to deconflict 2 different sort of things that we might mean when we say scholarship. There's scholarship in the form of financial support, and there's scholarship in the form of an academic award.
True.
I received a scholarship in my first year at Oxford, but it wasn't one awarded by Oxford. It couldn't be, because Oxford only awards them at the end of the first year. But that was actually an endowment set up by a leaver from my school, which was Tunbridge School, called Sir Andrew Judd. And he set up the endowment for boys from Tunbridge who performed well in their A levels and got a place at Oxford. So I was awarded that scholarship by my school, if you like, for my successful entry into Oxford. So those do exist. If you are going to Oxford or Cambridge or have those universities in your sights, do actually look into the sort of British, just research British scholarships, because there are scholarships for almost everyone. And I mean, sometimes that is just the most random thing you could possibly imagine. Like, I think there's a scholarship for the son of a shepherd whose flock is no larger than, 6 sheep or something like that, and comes from Kent. That kind of really crazy, archaic kind of stuff. But equally, more relevantly, there are scholarships that do support students who are coming from different parts of the world, and they're English-based scholarships, and they are endowments that are reserved entirely for instance, people coming from India, or maybe even specific cities within India. So it's worth getting in touch with a charitable foundation. The Roundtree is a very good one to start with. And they are always very helpful people, and they'll usually direct you into the right place. And I think there are plenty of different websites dedicated to illustrating where all these different funding pots are. But it being England, everything is quite haphazard, doesn't follow an obvious logical pattern, and is full of nuances and oddities. So it's just one of those things. If you're applying from India or abroad to Oxford and Cambridge, rest assured there are lots of little pots out there, but you do need to kind of search for them as part of your application process. Then the other thing I would say is that, of course, once you are at these colleges in Oxford and Cambridge, the word scholarship gets split. So there's the scholarship that you could get at the end of your prelims, which is an academic award that usually does come with a little bit of financial reward, but not much. I think it was £1,000 in my day. But there is also the form of scholarship which is just financial assistance. And the good thing about the collegiate system is that once you're in, you're really treated as a member of the family of the college. So if you do run into financial difficulties, usually these colleges, they're small, but relatively speaking for their size, they're well off. They're small fry compared to the Harvards, Yales, and Princetons of this world on their own, but they do have a lot of money that they actively try to divert towards the students. That's what's wonderful about being there. So when I ran into financial difficulty in my second year, without much more than a cursory form and a cursory visit to one of my tutors, I was, I had the burden of my tuition fees lifted for that year. It was as simple as that. So think of it as this much more kind of fluid process in the Oxford and Cambridge system. It's nothing like the system in the States, which is much more formalized, and I think a lot more impersonal.
I understand. Actually, I want to extend from what you just mentioned, how the system is different. Can you shed some light, and what is your understanding and insight about how the education overall for undergrad or postgrad differs in US and the UK as a whole?
How the education differs as a whole?
Yeah.
So without wanting to be too disparaging, because I think it can come across this way, but I think there are good historical reasons for the difference. The average US university entrant is at a much lower standard than the average UK university entrant. The reason for that is really the British public school system that had traditionally for years and years sent students or pupils to these universities was either sending them to Oxford and Cambridge or straight into the military or straight into the civil service. So the schools themselves were kind of preparation for real life. Now, America's never had dangerous territory. America's never had a formal empire beyond, the Philippines or you know, Cuba for a little bit and a couple of other places. Nothing like the British Empire, certainly. So its education systems never really reflected the need to sort of churn out lots of dependable soldiers, officials, civil servants, and so on, whereas the British school system has. So the level of education to which children are traditionally pushed in Britain is higher by the age of 18 than it was in the States, where actually the emphasis was slightly different. It aimed to be a much broader church in terms of the curriculum in the States. There's a deep-seated fear of elitism in America that means that, you know, things like private schools and a standing army and things like that were all very, a lot of suspicion against these kinds of things. And so children, by the time they reached 18, I guess the benchmark was lower, but more widely applied. Whereas in Britain, I think the standard tends to be higher, but you do also have, you know, some pretty bad state schools as well. So that means the first year in the US is all about kind of catching up and getting everyone to be level, on a level playing field. So you do have these credits that you have to complete that are actually deliberately opposite to the major that you're going to be taking. Some people see that as very frustrating. Some people see that as a wonderful opportunity to continue to have a broad liberal arts education. And, you know, that was the pedagogical line that America took, is to keep the first year very broad liberal arts, getting people who might be physics majors to go and do some psychology and some fine art and some literature in their first year. And this is really to bring everyone up to speed. Now, a new system, a new set of exams has emerged, which is the advanced placement exams, which happen around the age of 17, 18. And these give you the credits whilst you're still at school that you would otherwise need to earn at your US university. So it means that if you are a gifted student, if you have the capacity to take on a lot more work, you can tick off a lot of boxes with some of these credits that you need to earn in a broad spectrum of subjects. So say I'm really I'm dead set on studying history and history alone at Harvard, but I'm really, really bright, for example, and I managed to tick off AP Physics, AP Maths, AP Sociology, and something else. And that means actually, unusually, when I arrive at Harvard, I can actually just focus on my major because I've covered off all the credits in other subjects. So that's the main difference. It does mean that the US undergraduate courses tend to be 4 years instead of 3. So that's another major difference, especially if we're thinking about cost as well. And yeah, I think those are the major points, really. So it suits people who are all-rounders, aren't necessarily sure of what their passion is, to go for the States, and it suits those that are slightly more honed in on what they want to do, as I was, to focus on Britain, because you become a specialist much sooner.
Fair enough. That's a great answer. I think that gave us a lot of insight. Now, can you talk about what goes into getting the scholarships at the best universities around the world? Like a common perception. What makes a scholarship application worthwhile and worth considering?
Well, there's a number of different scholarships in the US, and I actually have a list here because you know, there's that many subdivisions even within the major.
You can actually show the presentation if you like at this point of time. You can show them that if we have a presentation for that.
Sure, I'll find it on my slide list if I can. So I'll start with this slide. Is everyone?
Yes, we can see it. Absolutely.
Okay, so this is the sort of snapshot of what constitutes the assessment criteria for you getting in. So obviously your high school grades are around a third. your ECA profile, which is all of the essays that you all have written, examples of leadership, internships that you've undertaken, social service that you've carried out, you know, that one sport that you've taken up to national level, whatever it might be. That forms a sort of 50%. But that 30 and that 50%, they top and tail actually the most important pillar, which is the standardized test. And the reason that I say that the standardized test is the most important, despite only being 20% of the overall criteria, is it is the first hurdle at which you can fall down. So you could have been the most successful, you know, prodigious entrepreneur and competed at national level in 2 different sports and have had, you know, 5 A levels and an advanced extension award and speak 5 different languages. But if you score an 1100 in your SAT and you apply to Harvard, there won't be a set of human eyes that even looks at your application. That's the harsh reality of it. And that's the harsh reality that hit me when I applied to the States the first time. And I thought, oh, well, SAT, yeah. What did I get? 1200, good enough, I suppose. Applied to Harvard, and I didn't even get an acknowledgement response. It went into the ether, and I thought, okay, hang on, I need to read into this a little bit more. And then I realized, actually, of course, they don't even know that I've achieved other things in other aspects of my application because I've fallen down so badly on the standardized test. So with all of that in mind, of course, you know, there are different types of scholarship, and these scholarships pick out or different emphases from what I would call your admissions profile. So there are obviously merit scholarships. These are based on your academic performance. They can be based on performance in the standardized tests, and they can also be based on your performance in sports. I have to reiterate, you know, that central pillar of the standardized test has to be of the requisite standard for you to then get eyes on from an actual assessor, and for your application then to do the rounds and go through the system for you to be picked up. The thing to say about the needs-based scholarships is that, well, they're usually only available to US residents.
Right.
Some colleges do give them out to non-US residents. Also, you do need to be the kind of student who's of a standard to get a merit scholarship, and then the needs-based scholarship kind of follows. So if the merit scholarship that you'd have been awarded, for example, is based on your academic performance, and it isn't enough, or it's only just enough to cover tuition fees, you would then have a very good chance of going into the needs-based financial aid system and being considered and probably being given the full package on that basis. That was my experience with a number of friends who did get full scholarships, needs-based scholarships from the UK, going to the States for their masters, so applying from Oxford for their masters. It was just very clear that they would have been well within the merit scholarship bracket. And then, of course, the system, you know, they made their own argument on paper, as it were, with their grades. You know, their application spoke for itself, and there were various people just picking it up and making sure that pots of money were drawn together to enable them to go. So that's the ideal, being able to put yourself in that position. And as I said, it can be across a number of different specialisms. It could be academic, it could be sporting, it could be musical. But you do need to cross that first hurdle on standardized tests, and then you're in the system, and then other cogs can start working.
Fair enough. Speaking of standardized tests, Dr. Andreas, we all know this year has been one of the most uncertain ones, and there's a lot of, I would say, universities are still not sure about what to do in terms of SATs or ACTs and how the future is going to be. So what is your opinion about how relevant will SATs be in this year and moving forward?
That's a really good question, Abhishek. And I've heard obviously different perspectives on this, and nevertheless, my view is very clear, and I think it's the view we all share at Collegify, and indeed it's the view shared amongst most professional educators, which is that the SAT and standardized testing in general is only set to become more entrenched as the standard process for those applying to university. We are already seeing it being rolled out more widely into other continents, be it Singapore, Hong Kong, and Europe, as I've already said. There is a strong likelihood that an online option will remain. The reason being that what they don't want, and College Board and companies who run these standardized tests, they are also businesses. What they don't want is to lose the resilience that they've had to build now because of the COVID-19 pandemic. There's been lots of testing, and like some of the standardized tests have already taken place online, and that capability only seems set to be pushed out further to other types of standardized tests. And also, being businesses, it gives them greater reach. I, for example, work with a lot of students here in this continent, so in Italy, Switzerland, France, Monaco, and so on. And one of the major issues is actually trying to find test dates that are suitable, because actually you can't take SAT subject tests, or you can't take every SAT or ACT test that you can in the US, which is a significant disadvantage if you've not perhaps scored as well in the test that you targeted. So actually, I've had students who've flown to Florida, for example, I had that this year, flown to Florida to take one part of an SAT test and come back. So from a business perspective alone, it makes perfect sense that College Board are going to roll out the online testing option, because that actually widens the net significantly for students across the rest of the world who perhaps don't have access to all of the test dates that are available to students in the US. Also, just from a cost perspective, these tests it's very hard to cheat them. Arguably, if they get the technology right, it's harder to do than in an exam hall where you have one or two invigilators, and cheating is actually pretty easy. It makes a lot more sense to just have each student bring their own kind of infrastructure to the test, rather than hire out these huge exam halls and invigilators and set all the desks up and only have tests available on a set number of days, and somehow trying to coordinate that across different time zones and so on. So yeah, I mean, online testing is here to stay. And just a brief historical point before I finish on this. These standardized tests have always been tests that are riding the crest of technology. They were the first tests to be run through old IBM computers that back in the day seemed like magic, because they read the crosses that students were making on their answer sheets. Well, this is actually in the test DNA, to be online and to be moving with technology. And I think nothing's lost in terms of the nature of the test by moving it online. It has always been a cutting edge test, and one that suits computerization. And I think for that reason as well, we should expect online testing to be very much front and center of the future.
That's a very, I think that's a very intriguing perspective you've given, because back in the day as well, that is how it was meant to be done. Another very important question, Dr. Andreas, a lot of students you must have encountered as well, and we get a lot of questions, is that they never figure out or find out the right way to figure out what is the right test, SAT or ACT, how to make the call when they start preparing.
Yeah, indeed. And it is, it's a question that I'll just skip forward now. I've discussed a few of these points about the new era of online testing and AI and machine learning, and perhaps this slide is a nice one to leave up as I talk about this, because the difference between taking an SAT and an ACT. So that SAT ACT distinction is one that's often given short shrift. It's seen as, you know, a fairly arbitrary decision point, and there are all sorts of quite you know, curt responses that I've heard to that distinction, like, oh well, ACT has a science section, that's probably for scientists. Whilst it is true that it has a standalone science section, it isn't true that it's necessarily the better test for people who prefer science. There are all sorts of very nuanced differences, and the sum of all those tiny parts can actually, and how you respond to those small differences as a student, can make a huge difference, and can end up in a sort of equivalent of, you know, 1 to 200 point difference on the SAT, or, you know, 4 or 5 mark difference on the ACT. That's just my guess, my sense. But the point is, you know, these things are very hard to determine simply through a discussion. And it's the kind of thing that is so bound up with lots of small details, and lots of small measurable interaction points that students have with the tests. Like, do they prefer longer, more detailed questions, or do they prefer shorter, faster paced questions?
Okay.
How do they cope with archaic language, the kind of language that you're likely to find on the SAT, for instance? And if I had a child now and I was putting him or her through the testing process, I would certainly just begin with a diagnostic test. Collegify does actually have an SAT versus ACT diagnostic, and it applies all of this machine learning and AI to precisely making that distinction for you in the most accurate way based on the answers of thousands of students. And from there, you know, you have actually a very detailed answer to that question in terms of performance analytics, you know, topic specific performance, and a predicted score in each. So it measures lots and lots of aspects of the child's or student's cognitive ability that simply aren't things that can be dug out in a face-to-face discussion with a counsellor. I mean, it's the diagnostic test, don't get me wrong, it should form part of a discussion with an education professional, but it really is, you know, it is the calculus on which any further discussion should be made, because it can make such a huge difference getting this question right as to whether you sit one exam or the other, which of course has huge impact on one's life path. You know, the difference between going to Harvard or, you know, NYU means a lot to people, or indeed the difference between going, you know, to UC Berkeley or somewhere else in California, or a state university somewhere. I mean, this is going to affect your life for at least the next 4 years, and every opportunity that you have as a result of where you are learning for the first time in the higher education environment.
Absolutely. I think this is a good time for us to call upon Anubhav to join us, and then we can talk about his journey for a while. Anubhav, can you please switch on your camera?
Yeah, I'm audible.
Yes, absolutely, Anubhav, you're here. I would request you,
Good
Anubhav,
evening.
good evening. Anubhav, I would request you to just talk about who you are and give an introduction about yourself, if you can do that.
Yeah, totally. So I've just graduated high school this year, and you know, like this year has been so uncertain. So my farewell and stuff was all ruined. But I'm kind of, you know, excited to go to university in spring. So I did apply to US and Canada and Europe. In the Europe, I didn't get too much acceptances because the quantitative side of my application wasn't too strong. But I did got accepted into US and Canada, and
Right.
I got full scholarship at Ohio Wesleyan University and 50% scholarships at Drexel and York University in Canada. And I'll be on the project team for HBO for the year
That's
2021
amazing.
in Los Angeles. And I'm currently doing an internship with a telecommunications company named T-Mobile that's in
Right.
Philadelphia. So that's pretty much about it. I network really well, and yeah, that's all. Like my past associations been with United Nations, TED, North American Association of Indian Students, WikiStage, Girl Up, He for She, UN Women, so on.
That's amazing, man. Well, first of all, congratulations, and thank you so much for
Thanks.
taking out the time to join us today. That's a really inspiring journey for a lot of students here with us. Dr. Andreas, can you just, you have any questions for Anubhav that you want to discuss?
Yeah, I do. Anubhav, I remember being in your position, but I wasn't successful at getting a scholarship in the States, partly because I had no idea of how the system worked, and I got my place at the university I wanted to go to in the UK, and I sort of didn't want to go through the repeated iterations of doing the SAT over and over again, which back in the day for me meant a 2-hour train journey and then a 45-minute tube journey across London, 2 evenings a week. So I would be interested to hear from you how you went about researching what was out there in terms of scholarships, and how that affected where you applied, and
Okay.
what support you had from Collegify or parents or otherwise in that process.
So I was totally, unaware of that. So like, very
Mm-hmm.
few of my cousins and siblings are abroad, studying abroad. I'll be few of them. So my family really didn't have an idea about, what kind of scholarships I could get and what university I should, focus at. But when I reached out to Collegify, so it was all referral programs. So two of my friends were at Collegify. One of them got into the first design school, that is Parsons School of Design in New York, and one of them got into Harvard University through Collegify. So both of them recommended me. They are close friends of mine. They told me to just blindfold myself and go to Collegify. Yeah, it sounded kind of strange, because any student would be not be blindfolded when they're too much into anxiety and stress about colleges and stuff. So yeah, I was pretty much in the same position. But when I first met the founder of Collegify, Adarsh sir, he really mentored me amazingly. He had a chat with my parents. My parents were totally against for not sending me abroad because of cost processes. So like, it's almost 300K dollars, or for me, like, for any student who wants to study in the States. And I believe it's pretty too much for middle class and higher middle class. And I believe most of the students who are aspiring and really hardworking are from that classes. So and my dad was in the Indian Army, so that was like totally a kind of a complete strange situation going abroad and stuff. But Collegify did help me out. I wasn't too much into SATs and giving standardized tests. I have never given one. I did 2 attempts, like one mock test attempts and one actual attempt, stuck at 1250 both of the times. And my scores were not consistent. So that time I was practicing from these free resources available online, like some books I could, buy from the market, or like some free resources or PDFs available on the internet or on Google. But that didn't really help. But like, one time I used to get like 1100, another time I used to get like 1400. So it was too much inconsistent. But when I used the Collegify portal, like when it was launched, the artificial intelligence, there are too many features about Collegify portal. I could really fill up a page about it. So there's artificial intelligence, there's analytics. You get to know where you're weak at, where your strong points are, or how you've been performing for last 1 week. So I believe that really stood out to me, because there's no portal like Collegify in India, or maybe in this whole east side of the world. And we like Collegify has been working too hard to just get it on board, and it's getting too successful, I believe. So yeah, that's how it went. And then others sure recommended me to have a good profile. So I really didn't had anything on my CV till my grade 11th, like, you can say it as junior year of my high school. So just in 2 years, Collegify was able to help me build up my profile, get a amazing resume on place, get an amazing profile, get an amazing standardized score. I got 1450 on my SATs in the second attempt. And I applied to I was a financial aid applicant. I didn't have money to just fill up I wasn't a full paying student. So I was really, really looking for 100% scholarships, or maybe 90, 80, or 70. Anything could help. So yeah, finally, like Ohio Wesleyan University gave me full scholarship. So I have like my full tuition scholarship. I'm just affording room and board, which is around $10,000 a year. So that's pretty affordable for me, and pretty affordable for any student who wants to, go. So that, like, if I had to put this in short, and just to clarify my experience, when as a student I was at that point of time, I just graduated high school, and I still had those nightmares of SAT, and just going and giving those mock tests, sitting for 3 hours, and just being totally stressed. Your palms are sweating. So all of that experience is really bad, and I really don't recommend people going through that. So you really need to find the right mentor, a right educator at the right point of time. And while being a high school student and navigating through this college process is totally hard alone. You should have your parents to support you, motivation, just give you motivation, support you emotionally, and through academically, and your profile wise, you should have a mentor, educator over you, and a specialist who really has experience in this, so he or she could help you just navigate through the process. Because there are, like, if someone is looking forward to apply abroad wherever they are, or I'll especially just focus on the United States, there are too many things to focus on. At the same time, you have to focus on your academics. Same time, you have to do internships. Social service is a must. You have to do, SATs, ACTs, give subject tests. You have to network around with admission, counselors when a university is, coming to your country, and you can make a connection with the admission directors. So there are too much things, and as a student, you don't have those kinds of organizational skills, and all of that skill set is being built in you by a mentor or an educator. And I don't believe Collegify is just lacks in any of them. So Collegify is, my experience would have been like really great with Collegify.
Yeah, thank you for that, Anubhav. And it's clear really that he's been able, as you can see from the slide, been able to turn himself into a
Absolutely.
superstar in terms of his his wider activities. But that obviously the backbone of that SAT, that solid SAT score, had to get there, and it's not a nice process, but it is one that the Collegify platform facilitates and then enables you to move on and actually play to your strengths. And that would be my advice. Actually, do recognize what your strengths are, everyone, and just pursue them to the utmost. If you are a sports person, really pursue your passion, because it's trying to be a jack of all trades, that often means you don't really stand out from the crowd. You just spread
Yeah,
yourself too thin.
one thing I recommend, and like I want to
Yeah.
add up to my stuff
Of course,
is
please.
Mm,
I've connected up with admission directors and got like really good
mm,
connections. So I had this amazing connection with this admission director from Williams College, which I didn't get into, but I still do talk to her. So she was telling me that SAT and ACT is a ticket for your application to go ahead in the admissions committee. So your profile, like your printed application would come, and your SAT score would be on top. And if you're really don't have a score that is expected by that university, your application is going into the dustbin.
mhm.
So I think that's the ticket for
Right.
any student to just enter any college in the states, and get a really good application impression on admission directors and on admissions committee. And the second thing I would really like to mention is about networking. Like, since most of the people who are here in this webinar can really see my standout factor as a networking wizard, which I developed, in the span of 2 years, connecting up with directors, connecting up with professionals in my field, the field I'm interested in. It helps you a lot, and it gives you overall, kind of a insight about where you want to go, because you're making a big life decision right now. You're just preparing for a bigger life decision that's going to change your life. And I really want everyone to just end up where they want to be, and not like, okay, commerce or STEM field is really popular in the United States, so I'm gonna go up for that. Just follow what you
Right.
want, even if you know, even if you like music, please just go for a bachelor's degree in music. United States, Canada, any part of country, if you're ready, nothing is hard, nothing is impossible, and that like that kind of motivation everyone has heard of, but maybe sometimes we as high school students don't apply that to our lives. So that's kind of a personal experience I wanted to give.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Anubhav, for that. And I think the two of us will agree with it and everyone. And one more point you that said about networking, I think it's so important for every student at your age to network and grow. Because see, until you ask, the answer is always going to be no. That's something I always emphasize on because students tend to forget, like you very rightly quoted, that it's important to reach out and speak. And of course, motivation needs to come from within, but you need to take the chance on what you're passionate about. Thank you so much for joining us, Anubhav. We really appreciate your time and good luck for all your future endeavors. We really wish you the luck. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm gonna just pin down my email to in
Please
the
do
chat
that.
if
Please
anyone
do that.
wants to
Absolutely.
reach out.
Yeah, that's very kind of you. Yeah, I'm sure
Thank you,
people appreciate that.
thank you.
Dr. Andreas, on that note in particular, I think he brought it up to light very rightly, and I want to just extend to that. Like you said, an FCT score is a ticket to get to the best universities and to the admission officers. So if I were to ask you a 1500 score in an FCT that a student has, or a brilliant profile, what is that will weigh more when we look at the university?
Well, it just depends at what point in the process we're talking about. A 1500 with Harvard as opposed to a 1400 is almost certainly going to get you visible.
True.
I would rather take my chances with with being visible and getting through, and then having one particular aspect of my wider profile that I've really developed well, that I'm kind of taking a human risk on someone recognizing.
Right.
Because the danger with giving tongue-tied, short shrift to the SAT
Right.
is that, as Anubhav said, you simply don't make it through the sift. And then you could have the most glittering, stellar, wider application. But if you're on a 1400 and you're applying to Harvard, you have to see it from their perspective. I think I remember the statistics for people applying for English to Oxford in the year that I applied, and at my college in particular, down at the interview level, I think it was about 80 people interviewing per place. And if you imagine what the sift is before then,
Imagine. Yes.
it's going to be huge because every single student in the UK applies to either Oxford or
Right.
Cambridge because everyone just says, well, I'll have a go. Why not? What's
Right.
to lose? But at least once you're through to that next stage, no matter how daunting, no matter how steep the pyramid seems at that point, you're at least getting human oversight of your application. So it's really important that you give yourself a fighting chance, and that's really what the SAT represents. It is not a guarantee of entry. In fact, pursuing the SAT so relentlessly to the point where you get a perfect score, you get a 1600, and you then coast and think that that's it, your work is done. I would say it's more likely than not to harm your chances of getting in.
Right.
It really needs to be the hurdle that you clear as quickly as possible to then get on with building out the rest of your profile as an applicant. And what universities are looking for is not people who can ace standardized test scores. That's simply a tool for them to actually be looking at the right applications from which they then make their decisions, right? So, they're not looking for people who otherwise they would make it very simple. They'd say 1580 and above, and they're not
Right.
doing that. So you need to score highly enough that you can be fairly certain that you're going to get a look in from a human being. And then beyond that, the task is to be as rounded or as high achieving a specialist as you possibly can be, based on your interests and your passions, and of course your hard work and application, even in the areas that you don't perhaps enjoy as much, because they're looking for someone who's got a wide range of interests and a natural curiosity and an interest in the world around them, who's going to be an engaging contributor and an avid learner within this amazing space that human beings create called a university, which is there to build minds.
Perfect. I think that was a very insightful thing that you mentioned about looking beyond, because see, if you're looking at a university, it depends on what stage we are, like you rightly mentioned, because it varies every university around the world in particular, not just the States. It matters at what stage we are when we're applying to the university. Any closing remarks from you, Dr. Andreas, about the universities or scholarships, or a piece of advice you want to give the students who are aspiring to study anywhere in the world at the best universities? Something you want to share with them?
I think it's just some personal advice. My whole application process, I was always told to play it safe. Don't bother with this college, don't bother with that. There's no point applying to the US. It's too laborious and time consuming. And you don't want to go there anyway because they make you do this in your first year and all this sort of nonsense. And I'm really glad that I just didn't listen to the advice that I was given about my dream choice, and that I still went for my dream choice, and that I applied for my dream college, and that I gave it everything that I had. And I didn't play the insurance card and get myself too settled in my mind with accepting that. I really did everything I could that year. And I was actually erring on the side of saying, well, actually, you know what, if I don't get it, I'd rather really not put too much time into researching my backup choices, as it were. I'm actually happy to try and work for a year and then have another go. And I just let my determination and my ambition and my dream drive me forward, because I really knew I was applying to the place that I really wanted to go. That gave me all the strength that I needed to even consider maybe applying a second year. And just to kind of round that story off with another example, one of my best friends at school, he didn't get in that year, but because he was still aiming at his dream institution, his dream college, he didn't take it as a knock. It didn't deflate him. He didn't lose momentum. He actually used that year to read even more about his subject, to make himself even more expert and more widely read and more knowledgeable and more experienced with the work experience he did. And he aced it the second year. So, don't lower your sights because of anyone's sensible advice. Obviously, provided you are a student who could conceivably get into one of these institutions, and use that dream, use that ambition to drive you forward through what is undeniably a very difficult year, because there's no better feeling than getting into one of your top 3 or top 5 universities, because then you get to really soak that up for the next 3 to 5 years.
Absolutely.
So this is the time in life to really focus.
That's a very good advice, because this year in particular, I particularly work with students, and you of course have, who tend to give up because people tell them to. And the worst part is the people who are telling them to give up and move to a different college are the ones who have no idea about what the dream is and the aspiration is. So I think that's really good advice for students. And students, Dr. Andreas, if you may write down your email ID here in the chat box so they can reach out to you if they have questions, if you don't mind. Great. And students, I hope you were able to get great information. Like Dr. Andreas has been kind enough to join us today and share all the insights he had, which were wonderful. And of course, Anubhav, thank you once again if you're here still. Yeah. And if you have any other queries, students, you can always reach out to us at hello@minor.com. Anubhav and Dr. Andreas have been kind enough to share the email IDs. You can reach out to them or reach out to us for any queries about your careers, your scholarships, about standardized test preparation. But students, please make sure that you reflect on the takeaway from the conversation we've had today, and wish you the luck and stay safe. Thank you so much, the two of you. I hope everyone got a great insight today. Thank you,
Thank you,
Anubhav.
everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Andreas.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.